so much. Hi everyone. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for staying with me. Yeah, this is an interesting slot, but I think we have the opportunity to have a real discussion here today. So please feel free, don't wait till the end of the slides with questions. If you have any questions during the talk, just raise your hand. We can make it a discussion. It would be much more interesting. What we're going to do today would be significantly different than what you've seen throughout this conference, because we are going to talk about a section of risk, of security risk, that is usually left underprotected. And so before I go deep into that, briefly about myself. My name is Michael. I lead the OWASP Low-Code, No-Code Top 10 project, which is an OWASP project dedicated to low-code, no-code. You can look it up. You'll find plenty of examples. There's a growing community of over 200 people that are actually part of this group. I co-founded a company called Zenity a couple of years ago. Zenity is focused on security for low-code, no-code. This is basically an application security company in this space. Previously, I spent a bunch of several years at Microsoft as part of their CTO office division. I work both on the blue side and the red side, so I gave a couple of talks at DEF CON about this space, and I also do, but actually most of my work is helping organizations protect themselves. What we're going to see today is, first of all, I'm going to try and make sure we are all on the same page on what low-code, no-code is, and why is it important? Why is it important for us to put our time in there? But also we're going to see just how far hackers can get when they are targeting these kind of services, because it's important for us to actually be able to convince ourselves and others that this is an important area to invest in. So after kind of this short disclaimer by RSA, this is what we're going to do in this session today. We're going to start by making sure we are all on the same page on what low-code, no-code actually is. Then we'll discuss how low-code applications gets built. We'll try to figure out what does the SDLC look like for low-code, no-code. After that, to share with you a bunch of attacks that we've observed in the wild. This is through, this comes from both observability that my company has and that the OWASP project provides. And we'll go through concrete examples of how hackers have been using those platforms to get what they want, basically, from the enterprise. And of course, we're going to finish with a few resources that you can actually use to be in a better situation, or to take this further inside of your organization. All right. So let's start with understanding what low-code, no-code actually is. This is kind of a silly joke, but actually I think it captures pretty well why low-code, no-code is important, and why we're seeing it pop up again and again here. I mean, IT will never be able to accomplish everything that the business needs, and we know that with the pace of change and things that are happening all around us, it's really impossible for IT to keep up. The people that are best equipped to move the business forward are, of course, business users, but they are often the ones that are less empowered than the IT team. And low-code, no-code really addresses this at its core, because it's about empowerment of everybody to build applications faster and in a way that requires less technical capabilities. Now, of course, low-code is also used by professional developers. We'll touch on that as well. But it's all about enablement. It's all about making it easier to solve business use cases. If this sounds familiar, then, well, it's because low-code is just one point in a very long trend of IT decentralization. There have been, over the years, there have been multiple tools that were used to empower business users and to provide more power in the hands of basically everyone. So Excel or Microsoft Office is a great example. How many jobs are entirely based on Excel today. So many of them, and even, I mean, the one tool that I have been using across throughout my career has been Excel. And I kind of started knowing nothing, and now I know some things, but Excel is still there because it's a great tool. And low-code, no-code is really another point on this evolution. Now, of course, Excel things came with things like macros, which are, up until today, are kind of close friends on the security side. But it's important to understand that while this is new, what's new here is that low-code, no-code is really successful. It's really being, business users are actually building this are actually using this to build meaningful things. But the idea behind it is not new at all. This is something that we've been experiencing since forever. And of course, as security teams, most of our programs are focused on what our developers are actually building, rather than what our business users are building. And we'll see in a moment where that could lead us. So one thing that's really important, I think, for us to have a security discussion on low-code, no-code, is first of all to understand the business value. So we are all on the same page on what types of applications are actually being built with low-code, no-code, and the fact that they are important for our business to operate. So let me show you a few real-world examples. Here's one. This is an application by Microsoft. When you go and visit Microsoft offices physically, you need to provide a vaccine proof. And this is a website. You go in, then you log into the website. After that, you need to upload your COVID certificate. So this is a pretty meaningful app, right? So it has a login. It of course, handles health data. It's important for them to get it right. So this is one interesting example. Let me show you another. This comes from a customer use case by Slack using Workato, where they're basically sharing that they've automated their entire order to cash processes through Workato, through low-code automation, which is amazing, right? This is a professional development team. This is heavily using low-code, but it's important to understand that this process cannot have any issues with it, right? This is about the actual bottom line of the company. Okay, let me show you a different scenario. This again is a use case for Microsoft, but this time it's a bit different. So the product marketing team at Microsoft found out that they have different processes to actually release products. So in order to facilitate one process that everybody could use, they created an app that basically allowed everybody to go through the steps required to release a product in a very standard way. The people that have created this app were part of the marketing team. This was not IT. And they have created it pretty quickly, so a few days. And you can see the highlighted quote there that a few months later, this application was the go-to standard for product launches. This is amazing, right? This shows the power of low code. But when we think about the security aspects of it, we can't really expect somebody from the business to think about the security aspects of what's going on with this application. Now, one thing that you might have in mind right now, in order to get yourself off the hook, is thinking that this might not be relevant in your organization. And I'm sorry to say that, but you don't really get a choice. And here's why. All of the largest SaaS vendors that most enterprises are using, have already incorporated low-code, no-code directly into their services. And so if you're using Microsoft, if you're using Salesforce or ServiceNow, you will find that while we are still, in some cases, we are thinking about these things as like point solutions, specific SaaS solutions. So you could be thinking about Salesforce as a CRM. Salesforce is no longer just a CRM. It's an application development platform. And the same is true for ServiceNow, and the same is true for Office. And so if you're using these types of SaaS platforms and you're used to thinking about them as under the Shadow IT prisma, then you might miss the fact that these are now closer to cloud than they are to SaaS. So like cloud is so the public cloud is a way for us to build applications. It's a platform to build applications in a kind of just making it easier to do that. This is what's happening right now with SaaS as well, but instead of being a public cloud where the developers are professional developers, this is a business cloud where the developers are business users. And we need to think about it that way. If we will continue to think about SaaS under the Shadow IT prisma only, then we're going to miss the fact that real applications gets built here. Now, one important piece here is that the people that are building these applications are our users, which makes this our problem. This is not a problem that the vendors will fix for you because it's not their part of the shared responsibility model. When we build an application, we are in charge of securing that application because we're the only ones that understand the risk appetite of our organization. And so one thing that's really important for us for you to get out of this talk is the fact that we don't get a choice. This is one of those scenarios like bring your own device, like mobile security, where we could be trying to say, well, we'll try and block it. That's not the way forward. One other thing I want you to note is that because these platforms they already have your business data, this means that these applications by definition are touching business data. Okay? So again, these are not applications that are used only for productivity. These are used to facilitate real business processes. Now, you don't actually need to take my word for it. Here are predictions by Gartner, and there's also a quote from Satya here, Microsoft CEO. So you can see in the quote by Gartner, there are two numbers they are expecting to see. One of them is that by 2025, 70% of new applications developed in the business will be developed with low-code, no-code. That's huge, right? That's incredible. And the second quote talks about low-code, no-code developers or developers outside of IT outnumbering professional developers 4-1. Now, you might be thinking that these numbers are, I don't know, maybe they're out there, right? How many of you think that these predictions will actually be true by 2025? Okay, how exceeded? How many think that this is actually too much, that we won't get there by 2025? Anyone? Okay, we'll see in a moment we'll try and figure out in a moment where we are. Look at the third quote here by Satya Nadella. I think Microsoft is of course one of the biggest drivers of the citizen development motion, and you can see just why. This is their attempt to try and help all of us solve all of the challenges that we're going to need to solve in a scalable way, in a way that doesn't require us to increase our engineering effort by 10x. And so, before I move to the next slide, one thing that I wanted to do, these are predictions, and so I really wanted to try and understand what's going on right now. How many citizen developers are there right now? And so, I started to go through Microsoft earning reports and just kind of grabbed numbers from them over the years. And when you do that, you see you can create a trend of the number of citizen developers that Microsoft is reporting to be building on top of their platform. Okay? And now, and I'll show you this number in a moment, but before I'm going to show you this number, I wanted to have some sort of a benchmark. I mean, if I give you a number, is it high, is it low? Who knows? So here's the benchmark. Microsoft says that today there are over 5 million .NET developers. That's the statistics that you can find on the Microsoft website. How many citizen developers on the Microsoft platforms do you think there are today? Think about it for a while. Have a number in your head. Here it is. So these are all numbers that I've taken. You can see the sources there, and if you want the specifics, just send me a note. I'll send you the link. You can see that last year, they reported 7 million citizen developers using Power Platform, using the low-code, no-code platform. You can see the kind of very rudimentary regression that I've created here, which puts them at around 8 today. This is incredible, right? And Microsoft is only a very small subset of the market. There are plenty of other successful vendors that have huge platforms already. And so for us to think that we can wait and we can and we don't need to target this right now, because I know your day, you're very busy, you have a lot of things to do. Security is always overwhelmed. This is already happening. And where do you think these developers are working? Who pays their salary? It's us, it's all of us, right? And so one important thing for us to try and understand is, how does it look like from a perspective of a single organization? So let's say I'm a Fortune 500 company. I'm not sure if we're using low code, no code, or we're not. So let me show you an anonymized statistics from a single organization. This is a chart of the number of applications developed with low code, no code in a single organization, right? These numbers are unprecedented. We've never had to deal with, how much is it? Like 65K apps built in 2 years. I mean, now let's think about what are the processes we can do behind it. I mean, can we do security reviews? Can we do threat modeling? I mean, can we just inventory those applications? No, we cannot. This is between 10x to 100x more applications that we're used to dealing with. Now, of course, these are very small. Most of them are very small applications. And most of them are probably fine. Most of them are probably only by the person who's created them. But do you know which ones? And do we know which ones have actually gone viral inside of our organization and are now being used by everyone, or by everyone within the specific org? Inside of these 75K apps, you'll find the application developed by the marketing team, and now everybody in the marketing team is using it. And what happens when that person leaves the organization and the app gets stale and people start asking questions of where this comes from? Or what happens if an auditor starts asking questions about how do we store the health data from the first applications that we've seen? These applications are not part of the security umbrella. We are not there. We're not letting the business users make their own decisions. They are not equipped to make the right decisions. All right. Here's a recap of this section. So first of all, this is a giant leap in productivity. And this is about enablement of your users. And we all know that the introduction of AI only makes this bigger, because AI is being pushed into those low-code, no-code platforms to allow you to build applications even faster and even less technical capabilities. This is powering critical workflows. Not all of them are critical, but many of them are. And it is predicted to be the vast majority of applications that are built within our organizations. We can't let this be something that happens without security being involved. This is probably happening in your own enterprise too, and you'll find, by the way, not one platform. You'll probably find, from what we're seeing, you'll probably find between 5 and 7. There are millions of developers that are building with low-code, no-code today that are part of the business. And in a large org, you'll find tens of thousands of apps. Actually, the largest ones are closer to 1 million from what we're seeing. Okay, so we've established that this is important. Now let's try and figure out what can we do about it, or how does the process of building this application look like. Here's the SDLC. This is kind of a very basic example. Of course, the SDLC varies between different organizations and different places, so this is not the important part. The important part is trying to figure out how does this relate to no-code. But before we do that, one thing that is important for us to remember, that we are using the SDLC as a way to set controls, to set security controls. All of those security controls that you're seeing right there, they are reliant on the fact that there is some sort of SDLC, right? Everything that is about the people that are building these applications, so security training, threat modeling, those things require a process. There are technical controls that we are putting in place: shift left, code scanning, security gates, There is everything that's about runtime, so monitoring, having the SOC, so the SOC will be able to actually do any sort of investigation there, right? Okay, now let's compare this to no-code. Here's the worst case scenario for no-code SDLC. You create something, and while you're creating it, there's an auto-save mechanism that actually pushes this to production, right? Now, it is important to note that in some cases, for low-code applications can be built by professional development teams, and then they probably do have some sort of a CI/CD pipeline, but the tools that they are provided are lacking. They are severely lacking. And so not only we are letting business users are building all of these applications, but none of our controls apply. And let's try and figure this out together. But actually, one other thing I wanted to say here is that it's important to note that this is why no-code is successful, because you don't need to exchange like 5 different hands before the application gets developed. You have a problem, you fix the problem. This is great. This is innovation. This is helpful for our organizations. But we can't just leave it there without having security intertwined. We do need to find a new method to actually apply here. So here's an attempt to try and think about all of the different security controls that we typically have with professional development, and whether or not they apply to low-code or to low-code, no-code. So you'll see that everything that relies on a human in the loop it goes out the window because the scale just won't let it happen. Even if you might be saying, okay, let's just review the important apps. That's fine. How do you find the important apps? That's a challenge. There's no code to scan, so code scanning won't help you. There's no CI/CD, so there's no shift left. You'll find that runtime monitoring would be very difficult. If something happens to one of these applications, your SOC will have nothing to do with it. They really won't know how to find what's going on there. And so what we're seeing people do is a couple of things. One is some of these platforms will produce artifacts for you, and then you can scan these artifacts. And the other is that if these platforms create a website, then you can do black box scanning of that website. Both of these produce a ton of false positives because they're not aware of the actual how these things gets built, right? They are not aware of the platform. They are not aware of the business logic behind it. It's not a really good, it's not a really viable solution. Okay, so as a recap on security controls, think about what is going on here. These are applications that have access to critical business data. They run on SaaS, which make them even more difficult to monitor. There's lacking SDLC, lacking controls. Business developers have no security awareness for the things that they're developing. And I'm not sure it's even right to ask them that, right? They have their own thing to do. And the scale here is unprecedented. Okay, so most of the time we have left, I'm going to shift a perspective because up until now, my perspective was from the enterprise perspective, from the blue team perspective. Now I'm going to shift to the other side, and I'll show you how low-code, no-code apps look for an attack, and how far, what can I gain out of it with an attacker's perspective. Okay, so before I actually show you the first attack, I'm going to show you a quick video because I think it's, maybe I'll try to show you a quick video. Okay. Okay, and this is going to continue to play while I explain what's going on. Basically, I'm going to solve a very specific use case. My company is using Slack as a way to communicate inside of the org. And one of the annoying features of Slack is that somebody can mention you on a public channel, and then you're expected to respond quickly, which might be annoying when you're working on something else. And so what I'm doing here is I'm using Zapier to plug into Slack. And whenever somebody mentions me on a public channel, I'm going to change my status to appear as if I'm on a call. And so nobody will, they'll be fine with me not replying, and then 5 minutes later I'm going to change back to an empty status so nobody will suspect that I do anything, anything is wrong here. Now this is a very silly example, right? But notice how easy it is to create this, for me to create this application. This is a pretty sophisticated piece of software. So it has to reach out to Slack APIs. It has to have some sort of an identity, right? Somehow it's authenticated to Slack. It has, there's a delay step here, so there's 5 minutes where this thing is sleeping. There's some sort of a state. This is working kind of somewhere. It needs to be able to facilitate changes in the Slack API. It's a big piece of software, right? I'm building it in 2 minutes, dragging and dropping things. So this is how easy it is to create these applications, and we got to give it to the platforms. They have done a great job at making it easier for people to build applications. This is great. One of the things that you'll find in this demo, if you look closely, is that in nowhere here did I provide access to Slack. You didn't see an OAuth pop up. We'll talk about it in a moment. And the other thing that you'll see is that when I'm finished with everything, it's going to have to pop up. Here it is. You see this little publish button? This is now in production, right? This was the SDLC for you. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand here is under which identity this is operating. How is Zapier connected to Slack? And when you look at it step by step, the first thing that you do, and by the way, this is not specific to Zapier, this is something with all of the different vendors. The first thing that you do with all of those platforms is that you choose which applications you'd like to connect to. The power of low-code, no-code is heavily reliant on the connectors that low-code, no-code has across your enterprises. This is not something that stays within Office. This is something that plugs into different SaaS vendors. It goes to on-prem, it goes to your cloud. And so these are these ready-made connectors that allow you to connect across your enterprise. So after you choose Slack, you get this kind of familiar OAuth flow, which is requiring a bunch of permissions. Now, what permissions is this asking for? This is asking for all of the permissions that you might want to use when you're using Slack, not for the specific permissions that I'm going to use in this application, right? Once I go through this OAuth flow, I get something really cool that's created. It's an object called a connection, right? What is this connection? This connection has, as an amazing feature, it has a share button. Okay, what do you think I'm sharing here? So this thing allows one user to share their own identity, their own connection to, for example, with another user. So let's try and figure out how this works. So on one side, there's Zapier or Power Platform or any other local platform. And on the other side, there's one enterprise, there's an enterprise repository. It could be a SaaS service like Slack, it could be on-prem, whatever it is. How are they connected? So essentially what happens, and this is actually a slide from Microsoft documentations, that there's a storage there that is recording authentication tokens, OAuth refresh tokens, and allows users to reshare them, to share them with each other. So here's the scenario. I build an application, and I want that application to have access to Slack, for example. I embed my own identity within that application using this refresh token. And now when I share this application with you, you're actually using my identity. This is breaking the identity and access model of the enterprise. Because rather than having different users using their own identities. Users can share identities of other users. And applications can run with the identities that belong to specific users. Now, because of this mechanism, what happens is that when you have lots of applications, and these are just examples I took off of marketplaces, where you see a bunch of applications that are being used by many people out of the marketplaces of the different platforms. What's important to note about these applications is actually the logos, because behind each one of those logos is a connection, right? You need to connect to each one of those things. So these platforms are essentially becoming a giant bag of credentials that they are collecting whenever you build one of those applications. And so when you have lots of applications, you end up with lots of connections. And these are credentials. These are a bunch of credentials. It could be the user's own credentials. It could be username, password to a SQL server. Those are several ways, several different kinds of connections. But because these platforms allow users to share these connections with each other, then essentially they are acting as what I like to call credential sharing as a service. Because when you can create these connections, you can share them with everyone else. And one of the things that we're actually finding is that in many of these platforms, there's some notion of a default environment, one environment where all applications get created by default. And that share button is not, can be shared with a specific user, but it could also be shared with the entire org. It can be shared with the entire default environment. And then what happens when you go to a large enterprise, you go to these default environments, you'll just find a bunch of credentials that are waiting for you. This is kind of preparing privilege escalation for a user. You can also think about it as a lateral movement, because I can go from one user to another. I encourage you, if you're a Microsoft shop, for example, go to the default environment in a Microsoft Power Platform, which is part of Office. You'll find SQL servers, you'll find user connections to Teams, you'll find user connections to Outlook. All of those things would just be available for you to use. One other thing that happens after people are leveraging these connections that have been shared or overshared with the entire organization, actually one point that is important there is that when I say your entire organization, I mean everybody in your Azure AD instance, including guests. Okay, so when hackers when you get access to one of those connections, the next thing that you can do is just use them to do whatever you want. And so here's an example of ransomware written with no code. It's pretty simple. So I'm just reaching out to a specific SharePoint site. I'm iterating over that SharePoint site. For each file, I'm encrypting the content of that file with an encryption function which is provided by the platform, because there are valid use cases for an encryption function. And then I override the file. Now this is for SharePoint, but you can imagine this for everywhere else, because again, these platforms can connect everywhere across your enterprise. Here's one other example we're seeing again and again, data exfiltration. So the problem of having, one of the things that people like to do in an enterprise is have their corporate email being routed to their own Gmail account, right? Because it's just more convenient. So calendar events, for example, this is something that everybody wants to do. We have a bunch of tools that help us make sure that this doesn't happen, right? There's DLP, there's things you can put on the email server. That's great. Here's what's happening here. There's a single application. With one hand, with one connection, it connects to the corporate account. And with the other hand, and another connection, it connects to the personal account. Instead of forwarding the email, they copy the content. How would you find this? This is not going through your network. This is running on the SaaS vendor's own machine. The only way for you to know that this is happening is to go through each one of those applications that are being created on those platforms and find out which ones are doing it. And we are seeing this with email, we are seeing this with file shares, we are seeing this with many different with everything you could expect. Because again, these applications, in many cases, don't have an identity of their own. They use their user's own identity. And so the user can, whatever the user can do, the user can now automate. One of the things that actually I forgot to mention earlier, but it's important for us to know that this concept of allowing applications to run on behalf of users is also something that allows low-code platforms to actually provide their value. Because if business users would have to ask for permissions whenever they want to build something, we would never see this growth that we saw at the beginning of this talk. And so this is inherent in the way that these platforms work, because it's inherent in the way that they enable business users to accomplish what they would like to do. Okay, here's something that might be a bit surprising. Yes?
How do you detect that?
What you can do is, I mean, there's one positive note here. Users have been moving data outside of the corporate boundary since forever. They're just doing it with copy and paste. And with copy and paste, it's difficult to find it, right? But right now, if they're using a low-code, no-code platform, then you can ask someone. There's an API for these platforms that would tell you, hey, well, show me all of the applications that were created on this platform. We never had this API for copy and paste files, right? The EDR, unfortunately, doesn't have visibility here because this is not happening on somebody's laptop. This is happening on the vendor's SaaS machine. And so, yeah. But one thing that the EDR is really important for, and one area that might be a bit untrivial, is that these platforms can also allow hackers to compromise machines. So there's actually a component of low-code, no-code called RPA, or a different version of low-code, no-code called RPA, and many of the platforms now combine low-code, no-code, and RPA itself. And if you think about what RPA is doing, RPA is automation that runs on people's laptops. It impersonates the users. It runs on the user context, so it's emulating the mouse and the keyboard. It's running on the same context as the user. And it allows a cloud provider to send a command to somebody's laptop, let that laptop do that command, and then get the results back. This is a C2 server that is plugged in directly to users' laptops. And what you'll find in this link is that, okay, I gave a DEF CON earlier this year showing how the RPA vendor, the RPA agent that Microsoft has baked into Windows 11 could easily be used by a hacker as a way to basically perform whatever you need to do with malware just without writing malware. And this is all trusted, right? These are agents trusted by the EDR. All of the network addresses here belong to trusted vendors. So this is a big issue. One thing that I wanted to do is make sure that we give you some tools that would allow you to actually do something with this. It would allow you to kind of maybe play around with this and understand what is the amount, try and grasp how big is this problem in your org. So one tool that you could use is Upgrades. This is a very simple tool, right? You give it access to a specific user, and it will show you all of the connections that user is actually able to use in a specific platform in Zapier. And it will also show you for each one of those connections who created that connection. So the ones to note, of course, are the connections that belong to another user. And we're actually working on extending this tool to other platforms as well. So if you're interested, just check it out. It's open source, free to use. Okay. One other thing, yes, please. So it depends on the way that you set up the application. You can build it in a way, you can build a low-code app in a way where every user logs in with their own identity and ends up using their own underlying connection to the data, to the actual data store. But you don't have to. You can build an application in a way where all of the different users would use a single connection by a single user. Yes, exactly. Those connections, because as we said earlier, those connections get created with the maximum permissions that the platform can require. Okay, one other thing that's really important for us to understand is that now when everybody can create an application within our organization, applications, of course, can do whatever they want with the connection that you provide to them as a user. So here's a nice idea. I will create an application that does something useful inside of an organization. Let's say I have already compromised some user's account within your org, including a guest account. I will create a useful application. People will start using it. It will ask for users access to users' emails, because I don't know, I will find out a good reason for it. While the user is using the application, I can do whatever I want with that connection, right? So I'll just take over their account. Now, this is not a problem that's new with low code. What's new here is that business users can create this, that everybody can create this. And the other important point is that guess where this application will be hosted? It will be hosted on a trusted service, right? So let's see that. Let's see that in action. Almost. Okay, I'm specifically using Microsoft here. I'm creating a Power App, which is, I just took something off the marketplace. This is an application that is supposed to facilitate an out of office. So basically it will decline emails for you. Of course, an application that declines emails for you has to have access to your email, right? So I'm just showing you what this application is actually doing. What I'm going to do is just add one liner here. You'll see it in a moment, where while this application is actually operating, I'm going to send an email on your behalf to my email saying I've been pwned. But of course, I can do other things that are more disruptive. And while I'm writing this down, and it takes me some time to type, once I finish with this application, I'm going to hit publish, and then I'm going to share it with everyone. And let me maybe, let's do, okay. So I'm done with the application. I'm going to publish the application. Again, no CI/CD, really quickly it's in production. Now I get the ability to share this with people. I'm going to share it with everybody in my account, again, including guests, the entire AD tenant. And now this application exists on a specific URL. I get this URL which belongs to Microsoft. And with another user, I'm just going to go into that URL. I get this window asking me to share my connections. And once I say approve, the application runs. And of course, my email has been compromised. So what we've actually seen here is a way for people to create phishing campaigns within your organization with a link that provides, with a link that has one security mechanism. There's one thing a user would need to do after they click this link inside of your organization. Here it is. This was the little kind of screen that we saw at the beginning when the user logged into this application. You notice that this is not the usual application, the usual asking for permissions that you see. This is not OAuth, right? You're not seeing the permissions that this is asking for. This is asking for an unbounded connection to these specific services. This is the only thing that's stopping me from owning that account once the user has hit this link. And just think about it. This is a link they are going to see a lot. If you're in an organization using Microsoft, They will have lots of these power-ups. Everybody's going to use them. They're going to trust them. Okay. The only thing that is actually, that might actually save us. However, you can turn this off. So there's a feature that allows you to automatically provide consent here. And people are actually using this because it removes friction for people to use applications. If you're an organization using Microsoft, I strongly recommend you to look at this specific flag and make sure it's off. Because if this flag is on, you have the only thing I need to do in order to compromise the user to establish phishing within your organization is to send somebody a link, and that link would be in a Microsoft domain. Okay. So we've seen a bunch of attacks that are using the local platforms themselves. Thank you. I'm going to show you one more thing before I go to defense, and this is going to be an interesting example. This is a slide from Microsoft Detection and Response team, where a few years ago, an APT group used a low-code platform as a way to remain persistent within the organization. Basically what happened is that they performed credential stuffing. They were able to compromise an admin account for a Microsoft tenant. And then rather than installing malware, moving laterally through the network, whatever we're expecting them to do, they created a single automation which used the e-discovery feature to search for secrets and PII, and then send it to an exfiltration endpoint, right? This automation was up and running for 6 months while defenders were looking for it. They knew that they were compromised, there were other threat actors in the network, but they couldn't find it because who's looking there? Nobody. So hackers are already taking advantage of it. And one thing that I'm going to show you, because I want us to have some time for questions. So one thing that I'm going to share is that basically, if you want to try this out for yourself inside of your organization, you'll find this is a tool that would help you. So essentially, what we've done is we went through the attack that was performed by this APT group, reproduced it, and we've packaged it into a tool that you can use in your own organization to check your own defenses. So try this out. You'll see, you will be able to see whether or not you'll be able to catch it, or what types of logs you'll have there. Okay, so one thing I do want to make sure I leave you with before we finish off is how to, what is the best way forward, okay? How do we do something really, what is the action item here? The first thing I'll say is that, well, the first thing I'll say is that there's a bunch of information out there, right? You're not alone, we are all in this together. There's a very large community around this project. This is the OWASP Low-Code, No-Code Top 10. This is all free to use. You'll find many more examples than the ones that I shared here today. This is actually, we are hoping that you could use this as the basis for your low-code security standard. And this brings me to the opportunity that we have, because there's a huge opportunity that all of us in this room have right now to create a security program for these types of applications. We need to understand how the security umbrella could apply to business development as well. There's an opportunity to establish a low-code security standard and to create an inventory of these applications, understanding what applications are actually being built by your organization. There's a bunch of tools you can leverage. There are a couple of tools we've seen already, and there's also another tool that we haven't, but you can change. You can find it on this link. I think that one of the things that's important for us before we kind of finish off, this might have been, I mean, one of the things that was important for me in this talk is to give you enough ammunition, enough examples, so you can go and then set it for on mode in your organization and get the right mindset for people to really address this problem. However, I think that it's important for us to understand that low-code, no-code can leave us in a better place than we were beforehand. Because remember the point we made earlier. When low-code, no-code is replacing something, business users have been doing whatever they want since forever. They've just been using drag and drop. Now, when they're using these platforms, if we partner with these platforms, if we look at what users are building in these platforms, we can end up with better visibility, better controls than we ever had. Thank you very much. This has been great. We have time for questions if there are any. Yes, please. So you're absolutely right, and you'll find that the OWASP top 10, in the OWASP top 10, only about 2 of the categories are focused on identity. You'll find hard-coded secrets. You'll find IDORs and other sort of kind of classic application security vulnerabilities, and you'll find plenty of examples in the top 10. One other thing I haven't mentioned at all is supply chain. Low-code, no-code is only powerful because there are a bunch of widgets you can just pick up and use. The people who are building these widgets are not people that you trust by default, because they are not only the platform vendors themselves. Yes, it's an app. I mean, it moves data, it does operations, it needs to log in. It's just an app.
For the tools that you posted out there, the Docker and the Topical, what roles do you have set up? Maybe if you roll out your tools?
You can have just a normal user in the platform. You don't need to have any privileged access. Sure. Yes? The share button allows one user to share their connection with another user. Once you create a connection, you go through the OAuth consent flow. The platform will record your refresh token, and then will allow another user to use that refresh token. The user won't get the actual access to the refresh token, but they will be able to do operations, and behind the scenes, the platform will inject the refresh token by my user. There are lots of minutes there. Some of the platforms are better than others in making this, in providing you with options. It's important to know that most platforms would allow you to also use a service account, but most business users don't have access to service accounts, right? So that's why this is being used.
So for Azure, or Power Apps, so you mentioned that there's a way to remove, you recommended turning off a flag, but that looks like it's per app. So you actually have to, it's not a global thing. So you actually have to list all the apps that have the permission set, and then disable that, and then kind of keep doing that to see if people are enabling apps with that permission, correct?
You're absolutely right. We need to own these applications. We need to be in the same way that we are scanning code, that we are doing runtime monitoring for pro code applications. We need to do the same for low code apps.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. I'll still be here afterwards. Thank you for staying with me.